Welcome to the Partis channel. Today we explain Genesis chapter 47 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am just so thrilled to guide you through this text today because honestly, this specific chapter contains such an incredible mix of elements. We're talking high-stakes political negotiations, intense macroeconomic crisis management, and some deeply, deeply moving family moments. We're going to go verse by verse to uncover exactly how the Israelites survived and actually laid down their roots in a totally foreign land. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and settle in because there is a lot of rich detail here to unpack. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll cover the arrival before Pharaoh. Then we'll look at how Joseph manages this massive famine, followed by Jacob's final sworn request. After that, we'll dive into some key clarifications, pull out a few practical life lessons, and wrap it all up with a quick chapter recap.
All right, part 1, arrival before Pharaoh and the Israelites settling in Goshen.
Now, to truly grasp what's happening here, we have to set the stage and remember exactly where we are in the narrative. According to the text, a severe, unrelenting famine is just ravaging the land. It's hitting both Canaan, where the Israelites came from, and the land of Egypt. In fact, in the original Hebrew text, it says the land was quite literally wasting away, or languishing, from the sheer exhaustion of having no crops. There is absolutely zero food. So Joseph's family has traveled all the way down to Egypt seeking a safe haven, right? A refuge, simply to survive. And you've got to watch what Joseph does here. He doesn't just sit around waiting to be summoned by the king. No, he takes the initiative. He goes directly to Pharaoh and officially announces, "My father and brothers, with their flocks and herds and everything they own, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen." He's totally controlling the narrative from the very start. So, out of his 11 brothers, Joseph deliberately selects exactly 5 of them to present before Pharaoh. The text doesn't explicitly name which 5 brothers he chose, but it clearly shows Joseph carefully managing a really delicate political situation. Think about it. He's acting as the strategic mediator between his rural shepherd family and the incredibly sophisticated royal Egyptian court. Why just 5? Well, he wants to present a group that looks capable and responsible, sure, but he absolutely does not want to present a massive contingent of able-bodied men that Pharaoh might perceive as a military or political threat. He is balancing this diplomacy perfectly. When the brothers finally stand before Pharaoh, the ruler asks them a very direct question. "What is your occupation?" The brothers answer honestly, saying, "Your servants are shepherds, just as our fathers were." Now, you might be wondering, why is this detail so vital? Well, culturally, the Egyptians actually despised shepherds. By leaning into this specific identity, the brothers ensure they won't be integrated into the main Egyptian population. Instead, they explain that the famine is so severe back in Canaan that their flocks have no pasture, and they humbly request to settle in the isolated, highly fertile region of Goshen. This is just a brilliant tactical move. It keeps them completely separate and safe. And Pharaoh's response? It's incredibly generous. He turns to Joseph and says, "The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land." He actually grants them Goshen. Furthermore, Pharaoh even adds that if any of the brothers have special ability, Joseph should put them in charge of Pharaoh's own personal livestock. Right after the brothers, Joseph brings his father, Jacob, in and presents him before Pharaoh. This is such a profound meeting. You have the spiritual patriarch of Israel standing face to face with the absolute political ruler of Egypt. And what happens immediately? Jacob blesses Pharaoh. In the ancient Near East, the dynamic is almost always that the greater person blesses the lesser person. So having Jacob, a refugee, acting as the spiritual superior here is a massive, profound shift in the energy of the room. When Pharaoh asks his age, Jacob responds, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." Jacob then blesses Pharaoh a second time before leaving his presence. And true to Pharaoh's word, Joseph settles his family in the district of Ramses, making sure to provide them with food according to the number of their children. Moving right into part 2, managing the severe famine and Joseph's economic strategy. Let's really dive into how Joseph manages this worsening crisis year after year. The text outlines 3 sequential, increasingly desperate steps the Egyptian people had to take to buy grain from Joseph as their private wealth completely unraveled. Step 1 is money. The famine was so severe that the people used up all their silver just to survive. Joseph collected all the money found in Egypt and Canaan as payment for the grain and brought it directly into Pharaoh's palace. But of course, eventually, the money ran out. The people were psychologically and physically desperate. They came to Joseph crying out, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is used up." This brings us to step 2, livestock. Joseph told them to bring their livestock in exchange for food, so they brought everything: their horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. Now, that trade successfully got them through that specific year, but when that year was over, they were truly destitute. They returned to Joseph and essentially said, "Look, we can't hide it. Our money is gone, our livestock is yours, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land." And this is step 3, land and servitude. They voluntarily offered to sell their fields and become servants to Pharaoh in exchange for food and seed, just so they wouldn't die. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, and the people were reduced to servitude, actually being relocated into the cities from one end of Egypt to the other to help centralize the whole food distribution process. But there is one very specific exception to this massive nationalization of the land. While the everyday Egyptian people sold their land to Pharaoh and basically bought food with their servitude, the Egyptian priests were treated entirely differently. Joseph did not buy the land of the priests. Why? Well, because the text explicitly states they received a regular allotment of food directly from Pharaoh's state budget. Because their daily needs were automatically met by the state, they never found themselves in a position where they had to sell their land. I suppose some things never change across thousands of years of human history, right? State-sponsored employees always seem to get those special perks. With all the land now officially belonging to Pharaoh, Joseph implements a brand new agricultural policy to restart the entire economy. He gives the people seed to plant the ground, but he establishes a new law along with it. When the crop comes in, a fifth of it, that's 20%, must go directly to Pharaoh as a tax. The other 4/5, or 80%, the people get to keep. They use that as seed for the fields and as food for themselves, their households, and their children. Now, I know a 20% flat tax might sound steep to some, or, hey, perhaps like an absolute dream depending on where you live today. But in the ancient world, especially during a post-famine recovery period, it was actually quite sustainable. It gave the people a real chance to rebuild their lives. Joseph established this as a lasting, permanent law concerning land in Egypt.
Now, you might be wondering, how did the people actually feel about losing their family lands and paying this new 20% tax? Well, the text gives us their exact reaction. They said to Joseph, "You have saved our lives. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh." They weren't resentful at all. They were incredibly, deeply grateful. In the Hebrew text, the phrase, "find favor in the eyes of our Lord," demonstrates utter, complete submission. They are actively choosing life as serfs over death as free men. From their perspective, Joseph's strict, methodical economic management had literally prevented mass starvation, and they gladly accepted their new status in exchange for their very lives.
Okay, part 3, Jacob's final sworn request, preparing for the end. Before we look at Jacob's final days, the text draws this incredibly stark contrast right here in verse 27. On the one hand, the native Egyptians had lost their land and entered into servitude just to survive this horrific famine. On the other hand, look at the Israelites. Settled in the region of Goshen, they actually acquired property there. And not only did they acquire property, but the text emphasizes that they were fruitful and increased greatly in number. This specific phrasing is a direct echo of the original mandate God gave to humanity all the way back in Genesis 1. It shows us that while the mightiest empire on earth is starving and totally restructuring, God's promise to Israel is actively flourishing. Despite being refugees in a foreign land during a catastrophic famine, they absolutely thrived. The text then tells us that Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. This brought the total years of his life to a remarkable 147. But there's a really beautiful poetic significance to those 17 years. If you recall from our earlier chapters, Jacob spent exactly the first 17 years of Joseph's life with him back in Canaan, before Joseph was tragically sold into Egypt. And now Jacob gets to spend the last 17 years of his own life with Joseph in Egypt. It is just a stunning, symmetrical bookend to their relationship. But as the time drew near for Israel to die, he knew he had to make some final, very important arrangements. Jacob calls for his son Joseph. He asks Joseph to promise to show him kindness and faithfulness, but he asks for it in a very specific, traditional way. He says, "Put your hand under my thigh." Now, to our modern ears, this sounds incredibly unusual, right? But in ancient biblical times, this was a highly solemn, physical gesture used to swear an absolute, unbreakable oath. It signaled that the promise being made was of the absolute utmost importance, binding on generations, and it simply could not be broken under any circumstances whatsoever. So what was this incredibly important request? Jacob tells Joseph directly, "Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." Joseph responds, "I will do as you say." But Jacob insists, saying, "Swear to me." So Joseph formally swears the oath. Once the promise is completely secured, the text tells us that Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Interestingly, the Hebrew word for bed, which is mita, and the word for staff, which is mate, share the exact same root consonants. This is a really cool linguistic detail, which explains why some translations say he bowed at the head of his bed, while others say he leaned on his staff. Either way, his final, pressing earthly concern was officially resolved. Part 4 now. Key ideas and clarifications so we really understand the details. A major key idea to unpack here is found in the specific Hebrew word Jacob uses when he's speaking to Pharaoh. The word is megurim, which is typically translated as pilgrimage or sojourning. Think about it. When Pharaoh asked his age, Jacob didn't just say, "Oh, I'm 130 years old." He framed his entire existence around this concept of megurim. He's describing living as a temporary wanderer or an alien rather than a permanently settled landowner. It perfectly reflects the reality that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived as nomads in tents, constantly waiting for the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise regarding the land. Jacob is deeply acknowledging that his entire life has been a difficult, temporary journey of wandering, a core theme that heavily defines the history of the patriarchs. Moving to part 5, practical life lessons. Let's talk about what we can actually take away from all this. So how does this ancient text apply to us today? Let's carefully extract the practical wisdom from these literal events. First up, from Joseph, we learn about wise and honest management during times of crisis. Look, when we face personal or professional crises, it's so easy to panic or act selfishly. But Joseph didn't enrich himself with the silver he collected. He brought it straight to the palace. He managed the food supply methodically to save an entire nation. It challenges us to act with integrity when resources are scarce. Second, from the Egyptian people, we learn the immense value of expressing deep gratitude to those who help us survive. Even when the Egyptians lost their property and entered servitude, they recognized the bigger picture. Joseph had saved their lives. In our own lives, when people help us navigate hard times, even if the outcome isn't totally perfect or if it costs us something, we really need to show genuine appreciation rather than resentment. Third, from Joseph and Jacob, we see the profound importance of honoring the final wishes of our parents. Jacob was asking for a monumentally difficult task, to be transported all the way out of the country after death. Joseph didn't dismiss it. He swore a binding oath to uphold it. This reminds us of the sacred duty we have to respect and honor the legacy and the requests of those who came before us. And finally, from the Israelites in Goshen, we learn about finding ways to be fruitful even in unfamiliar, difficult environments. They were refugees in a foreign land during a catastrophic region-wide famine. Yet, they adapted, they worked hard, and they thrived. It really teaches us that our environment doesn't have to dictate our growth. With the right mindset and blessing, we can flourish absolutely anywhere. And finally, part 6, our chapter summary and recap. Let's review Genesis 47. Let's just cement the chronological flow of this chapter in our minds. We started with point 1, the arrival in Goshen during year 1 of their stay. Joseph masterfully presents his brothers and his father Jacob to Pharaoh, who grants them the incredibly fertile, isolated region of Goshen. Then the tone dramatically shifts as we move to point 2, the height of the famine. We watch those massive economic shifts as Joseph methodically traded grain for money, then livestock, and finally the land itself, establishing a 20% tax to keep the entire nation alive. And we conclude with point 3, Jacob's final days. After 17 years of prosperity in Egypt, a 147-year-old Jacob makes Joseph swear a solemn, unbreakable oath to bury him back in the land of his ancestors, Canaan. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. Jacob survived the terrible famine. His family was highly favored by the Pharaoh. They acquired excellent property and they multiplied greatly. Yet despite all this incredible prosperity right there in Egypt, he was absolutely adamant about not being buried there. Why? Because it shows where his true hope and identity remained firmly rooted. His body was in Egypt, but his heart was in the Promised Land. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.